You're listening to Smart Moves with your hosts, Ann Riley Caldwell and Matt Wilson.
Hey, welcome to Smart Moves with Ann Riley and Matt. We are the podcast that helps you make smart and strategic decisions, especially when it comes to buying and selling real estate. I'm Ann Riley Caldwell, not your ordinary agent. I work here in the Middle Tennessee area, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Wilson, who's a loan officer. And tell us about yourself, Matt.
What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Wilson. I'm a mortgage guy, and I make mortgages not suck. Um, so today we're going to be talking about investors or beginning investors, right? Property investors. We're not talking about gold or stocks or anything like that, Bitcoin. We're talking about property because this is a real estate show. So one of the big things that I hear a lot is that, oh, I'm an investor. I don't need a real estate agent. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so investors, I would say, do need realtors. There's a few out there that are super seasoned that have, backgrounds that lead, to them being great investors and knowing what they're doing. But I find from phone calls that I get from people who want to say they are an investor, I kind of call them investor 007, like they think they're James Bond and they've got all these tools and they've got all these ways, to go find these properties and magically turn them into profit making machines. And then usually when I start asking them questions, they really don't even know where to start. So that is why we're doing this podcast today, because I just had a phone call like that from a person. I could tell that he was a new investor, that he did not have the correct information. Hate to be the one to break it to you, but just because you watch TikTok and YouTube does not make you an investor. Uh, and in fact, you could lose tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars if you don't do it right and have the correct advice. There's also a lot of companies and people out there who say they've been successful investors, and maybe they have, and they have seminars that they have hundreds of people come to. I can guarantee you hundreds of people are not going to turn into successful investors. So hate to break it to you, because they sell you a system and they think it's just going to work the same throughout the whole US, and that's just not going to happen. So the smart way to be an investor, and especially if you're getting started or you're still relatively new, is to build a great team around you. That would include a realtor, that would include a lender. Hey, I know a couple people, by the way. That would include potentially even an attorney, a great title company, people that can truly walk you through the process, just like anytime that you're thinking about making an investment. And too many people, because of the hype and because of the videos out there, think, hey, I'll just wake up and I'll just become a property investor. And it just doesn't work that way. So, there's so much into it. Agents can help you find properties that you can't find on your own. Agents and a great lender can help you save money. We can help you negotiate. I am an investor. I've flipped some properties. I actually own an investment property right now that used to be my primary residence. So I've been down that road. I know what it takes. I know what it looks like. There's just so many steps to the process. Yes, in some ways it's a normal real estate transaction, but in other ways it is not.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is, in much the same way as I shouldn't get on YouTube and expect that I'm as good as the mechanic teaching me how to fix my car, they shouldn't get on YouTube and assume that they're just as good as somebody that lives and makes all their money off real estate today, right?
Oh,
Um,
God.
yeah. See, one of the things that I've seen from my end of it is that you've got issues with people wanting to do for sell by owner, or they think they're going to save some money by not having a real estate agent. And, let's be honest, with some agents that don't know what they're doing, you might save some money. But if you've got a great agent, such as Ann Riley, they're going to help save you money in other ways than just the overall price. One of the big things is that there are 1,000 different ways that you can fill out a purchase and sell agreement, and they all have different implications and things like that. And what typically winds up happening is, if I'm lending on something where there's no agents involved, they start coming to me asking me how they should fill out the contract. Well, here's the thing. I didn't go sit through the same sort of torturous classes that Anna Riley did, and she didn't sit through the torturous classes that I did. I'm not licensed to talk to you about how to fill out a contract. I can tell you how it impacts your mortgage. That's about it. Um, So, there is a lot to be said for having a good agent in your corner with all of this. The next big thing is you've got to figure out what are your goals with having an investment property. Are you just wanting to have an investment property to decide that it's going to be, you're going to be cool because you've got an investment property now? Are you prioritizing cash flow, or are you prioritizing actual profit on it? Like you've got investment properties right now. Is it always profitable? How does that usually go?
No, and there's different neighbor. I mean, the expertise, because this person that called me, he didn't know one neighborhood from another. He didn't know one city from another. He didn't know the regulations from one city to another. He basically knew nothing. He just thought, oh, townhome, not too much overhead. Let me just call about it, right? And so, particularly people with short-term rentals, because we hear Airbnb, VRBO, oh, it has to be easy. Well, most places around Middle Tennessee now, you can't do short-term rentals. It ain't going to happen. There's one neighborhood in the Nashville area that I'm aware of. You'll have to call me if you want to know what it is. That they actually in their one little section have kind of overruled or had an exception to Davidson County rules, where if you buy certain properties in that particular neighborhood, they can be short-term rentals. Which is not the norm here in the Nashville area. There's also certain properties that from the jump, from when they are developed as a short-term rental building. Again, not the norm. So those are things that as an agent, I know that most people aren't going to know. A lot of cities have totally outright banned short-term rentals, period. There are no workarounds. It ain't going to happen. There are some creative ways around that I know of. A lot of people get into it thinking I'll just buy something. So I asked the guy, I said, are you familiar with this neighborhood? He's like, no. I'm like, okay. So then I said to him, I said probably 3 times on this one fairly short phone call, you can't just do short-term rentals wherever you want to. And it just never resonated with him. Like I could tell like the switch never flipped. Like he just, because of the questions he kept asking me. And so I ran through a bunch of cities that I'm like, you can't do them in all these cities in Middle Tennessee. And it just like the light bulb never went off.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely run into some similar conversations with people. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to short-term rentals and stuff like that, but I know enough to know that you can't just go decide to do it at any street corner. It's not gonna fly with the city and local government. Um, the other thing that I see people do a lot on my end as the finance guy and all of it is they'll be wanting to move up. They great. You've outgrown your first house, and they want to retain the first house as a investment property. The problem that I see a lot of the times with people though is that when they do that, their first house is where all of their money's stored. It's in the equity of the house. And then they've got to save up a down payment to purchase the next house with. And then after the down payment, they're going into the landlord lifestyle with no reserves. So at that point, what are you going to do if your new tenant decides to, flush a golf ball or something and screw up your plumbing, or worse, or their kid decides to fry a turkey in the living room and blow up the ceiling fan. I don't know. Crazy crap happens all the time. I've got young children that it's impressive the things that they can figure out a way to break sometimes. I mean, what have you seen from that angle? Just a move up buyer. What have you seen commonplace with those sorts of people?
Well, with the move up buyers, I mean, most of the time when I work with people, I ask them, what do you see your future being in the next, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And then that usually launches into the conversation of, I don't see myself moving, or we're going to be here for 3 or 4 years and then we're going to sell. And then I usually ask them, do you have any investment goals? Because I send them to you to talk about those things up front if they think that they're going to want to do something. For instance, I had one couple, they bought a townhome. They knew they were only going to be there a short period of time, and they knew that they wanted to turn it into an investment property because they were going to expand their family. And this townhome was not going to work for them for the long term. And so had that conversation up front so that they already knew what they were going to have to do in order to, how long they had to live there because of the loan type that they had, what they were going to need to do to be able to qualify to move into a much larger home for their family as it expanded, what the rental income was probably going to look like, and whether that was going to cover the mortgage on the home that they were going to be buying, the townhome that they were buying first. So, when people tell me that they have any interest whatsoever in maybe being an investor at some point in time, then I actually encourage them to have that conversation with Matt up front so that they can not only be making the right decisions for this deal, to potentially have equity in it, to know what their mortgage payment's going to be, what their rent would have to be to cover it, and those types of conversations. So the best thing is, if you have a plan, let's talk about the plan up front. If you don't end up doing it, you don't end up doing it. If you end up just selling your house and moving on to another one, then that's totally fine. I mean, that's the easier scenario. But really trying to get people to think about those things up front, I found to be the most successful.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously plans could change, but I would prefer to help you plan out from the beginning as opposed to cobbling together some sort of half-baked idea along the way. Um, and there's really three main ways that people are going to make money on investment properties. It's the cash flow, or it's the equity, or it's flipping. Um, when we break those three things down, though, what I see that breaks a lot of investors most of the time is the cash flow part of things. Because at the end of the day, equity until you sell the house may as well be monopoly money. If you don't have cash flow running every month, then, if the tenant's not in the house or the tenant doesn't pay their mortgage or pay their rent so you can pay your mortgage or something like that, you're kind of up a creek because cash flow is what lets your family breathe. Equity doesn't until you sell.
Yeah,
So
let's talk a little bit about, there's a concept of cash flowing, and then there's a concept of profit. So let's kind of talk about those two things. When you're an investor, where is the money? What do you need in the short term, and what are you looking to get out of it in the long term? And that whole cash flow versus profit equation.
yeah, and they don't have to go at odds with each other, but it's something that you definitely have to keep the big picture in mind on because, we would expect most properties are going to appreciate in value, unless something crazy happens. So you're probably going to have some degree of profitability down the road on that. But if in the meantime, you've got maintenance expenses that start adding up, or tenants that don't pay their rent, or your idea of what you could get for rent on the property is not what you actually can in reality get for rent on the property, and then the mortgage payment's too high, well, so what if the tenant's paying your mortgage and that's all they're doing? You don't have any money there that is any profit from month to month to fix anything whenever it inevitably breaks. Likewise, a lot of people are going to say, I'm going to self-manage this thing versus hiring a management company. Um, you know, I've experienced being a tenant before and having to call a landlord in the middle of the night because a pipe busted. The landlord had to come out and deal with it in the middle of the night for me. You're probably going to get over that pretty fast and ready to hire somebody to be be a mediator in the middle. So like, what is your take as far as like what numbers are you shooting for if you're investing in a property?
Well, there's a cap rate that most people shoot for that's maybe as low as 4%, and 10% would be ideal. So Matt can talk a little bit about that too. But I mean, on paper, I always I always add anywhere from 10 to 25% to whatever I think it's going to cost me to do something. Or I guess subtract it depending upon how you're coming out the numbers. But you've got to, I mean, you have to remember it also is going to depend on the type of property. Because if you have a single family home, you're potentially going to have more overhead, and more things come up like replacing a roof that, if you're part of a townhome and you're paying a monthly HOA, then they're responsible usually for everything outside the property. So you really have to understand the different types of potential investment properties and what's covered by an HOA, what's not covered by an HOA. Is there an HOA? Also, what restrictions does the HOA have? So we'll go on a tangent on HOAs for a second. The other thing you have to look at is, HOAs, a lot of them will limit investment periods. You have to have somebody in there sometimes for 6 months or 12 months. So you can't do a short-term rental because of an HOA sometimes, even if the city or the county will let you do that. You also have to know what's covered in your HOA payment. If it's a single family home, then you're responsible usually for the entire home. So if the roof needs to be replaced, you're paying for that. So I think what a lot of investors don't do is they don't put money aside from rent every month to take care of those capital expenditures and the HVAC going out, the appliances breaking, that type of thing. So in addition to whatever it's costing you based upon what you've worked out with your tenant on who's paying what, from electric bills to water bills to internet to, whatever, all of those things have to be taken into account based upon what your lease says. And then also, what is it that you're ultimately responsible for? And then there's also vacancy breaks where you have somebody move out and you don't have anybody move in for 2, 3, 4 months. And most people don't anticipate that happening. They just think, oh, I'm going to have it and it's just miraculously going to be rented forever, every day that I own it. And you also don't take account those types of things. And then just general maintenance, on the property and whether or not your tenants are doing it or you're doing it. And if you have your tenants doing it, the odds are good. Like I bought air filters for my tenants. I bought 24 of them. And so I said, can you please change the air filter every month? After they moved out, they never even opened the box. So, so then your HVAC runs harder. So now you probably have to replace your HVAC sooner because even though you handed them the stuff that they needed to do for maintenance, they still didn't do it. All of that goes into a calculation that needs to be done on a spreadsheet. And then there's other people that focus so much on the rent and what's going to happen right now. They don't think about the equity.
Yeah, I definitely see people that steer that direction too. I mean, both of them are important, and it really just depends on what stage of your investment career you're at. For the first one, you probably want it to have some cash flow because if you don't, you're not going to have enough breathing room to get a second one. But eventually, you can use that equity as a tool to acquire more properties eventually. We're able to do cash out in various ways on investment properties. There's 1,001 different ways you can finance an investment property these days. It depends on your situation. But one of the most popular things that I've seen people do is get a property, pay on it for a while, have a tenant in it, and then use the equity from that property to help buy another property, be a down payment for an additional property. The thing is to be careful about with all of this, in my opinion, dealing with the financial side of it. You don't want to run at that with little to no cash, like literal cash, not equity cash. And I would recommend probably 12-month reserves for something like that. Reason being is let's just for easy math say that you've got a mortgage payment of $2,000. That's $24,000 in reserves. If an HVAC goes out, you've lost half of it right there. If your roof needs replaced, you've probably lost over half that right there. So that's where I come up with that number at because you got to count on if that happens, there's probably a likelihood that you've also got a tenant that's not in it paying your rent or paying your mortgage while they pay their rent, while that's going on at very least, or maybe there's a vacancy in the middle or something. So if you start compounding some of those issues, you want to have some money set aside just in case. Because there's nothing that's going to lose you money faster than having to fire sell something before it gets foreclosed on. So anyway, now I know that you've definitely seen some things. You've seen some crazy stuff over the years. Have you ever seen anybody like just uneducated just step in it as it pertains to being an investor?
I mean, I haven't for the people that I've obviously worked with because I walk them through the situation. Sure. I mean, there are definitely people who call sometimes in a panic, thinking about needing to sell their property because it is about to get foreclosed on, or they can't make the rehab or the maintenance, and so they're forced to sell it because they can't come up with the money to keep it as an investment property. So from my side, I probably see that more often than anything else. um, like I said, I can see talking to some of these wannabe investors, they're going to end up there if they're not careful, because they're just not thinking through the process correctly and having the right conversations and asking the right questions because they don't know the questions to ask. I mean, one of my fortes from all the many things I've done in my life is even if I don't have the answers, or I'm not supposed to give you the answer because I'm not an attorney, even though I am, but I can't be in this instance. I'm not a loan officer like Matt, but I still know things. So one of my expertise points is I send people back with a million questions, because the thing is, in working with all people, whether it's investors or first time home buyers or whatever, anytime you're newer to something, you don't even know the questions to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you've got to have context for the questions. Here's the other thing too that I've seen people think. They'll tell me, Matt, I want to earn passive income. I want to invest in real estate. If that's your goal, don't invest in real estate, because real estate investing is not going to be passive or anything close to it. It's another job in another way, and it's one that may not have the time restrictions that your current job has. So passive income is a myth as it pertains to real estate. You're going to have to do a lot of active things, searching for the property, working with your agent to find the property, insuring the property, financing the property potentially, taking care of the thing whenever somebody flushes a hamster or whatever. And, it's going to be a lot more work than you think it is from a active standpoint. Um, so definitely don't go into it with unrealistic expectations of that. Um, you know, uh, Biggest thing we're trying to do with this conversation today is prevent you from going out there and creating a financial disaster for yourself accidentally. Here's one thing that I like to tell people about if they are buying their first move up house and going to take the previous home and turn it into an investment property. Weigh out the risk versus reward of just selling it and applying that equity to the new purchase. Because if the big idea is I want to create more income, well, one thing you can do is create lower payments and approximate the same thing. So if you got $100,000 in equity there and you get a $600 cheaper mortgage payment on the new house, that in and of itself may be more than you would make monthly in having the other property. And nobody's going to be a better tenant for property that you've invested in than you are. So if you just don't have the money set aside yet to be able to pull off owning two properties with reserves, maybe it is better to go ahead and just sell the other house.
Well, the other thing I get sometimes in talking to people is, and I talk them out of this a lot of times, hopefully, is I get phone calls that say, I want to buy an investment property. One of the first things I say is, well, do you own do you own the property that you live in now? And no, they're renting. And I'm like, why would you want to buy an investment property before you own a home yourself?
Yes, that's 100% right. Like I have that conversation somewhat regularly. Here's the thing: no tenant is going to pay their rent better than you are. No tenant is going to take care of the house better than you are. So your first investment property needs to be the house that you're living in, so that you're not throwing away your rent money at 100% interest to somebody else. It doesn't matter what interest rates are compared to rent. Um, so yes, 110%. Don't be that person unless you're independently wealthy for some reason. You just like renting an apartment in Miami or something weird like that. Don't go after an investment property first. Here's the other thing. If you go after the investment property first, you're going to screw yourself out of getting first time homebuyer benefits. So, use those while you got them. That way you don't, play the long game. Don't play the tomorrow game with all this.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there are things out there that can help you buy your first owner occupied home. And, if you need or want that help, and or potentially a lower interest rate, et cetera, that come along with some of those programs, don't mess it up by thinking you need to be an investor first. So I'm going to run through some different loan types and let Matt tell us if they can be used for investment property and just hit sort of the highlights of how and potentially how they might be a little bit different than if you're buying an owner occupied home. Because a lot of these rules and interest rates and things also change, not necessarily to your benefit when it comes to buying an investment property. One of the myths that I'll just throw out there real quick to set this up is I cannot tell you how many times Matt and I hear, oh, I have to have 20% to buy an owner occupied home, so I'm still saving money. I don't know how in this day and age we still have people who think they need 20% down and they're not buying something because they're trying to save this unreasonable amount of money for most people. And so, but in the investment world, you probably do need a lot more down because for owner occupied, you need anywhere usually from 0 to maybe 5%. If Matt can correct me if I'm wrong. But for investment loans, I believe, Matt, that you typically do need a higher percentage down, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, for owner occupied, meaning that you live there, you sleep there, you have the ability to purchase it with zero down in a lot of cases, or as little as 3 to 5% down, just like she just said. The the thing is with investment properties, you're going to have 20% down, just out the gate. Just count on it, at least 20% down. Really, for better pricing purposes, you want 25% down. That's going to get you a better cash flow position. It's going to get you better interest rates. Um, so, it is a much steeper position to jump into to be an investor than it is to be somebody that's a owner occupier of their house. But the thing is like if you had to choose which mortgage payment you're making, you're going to pay for the one that you're living in, not the one that you're not. So they build out those loan products accordingly. Um, that also ties into like if you're going to invest in property, just like I said before, you need reserves, but you also need down payment. So you probably do need a lot of cash available to jump into the investment game in one form or another.
So can people use conventional and or FHA loans to buy investment property?
Conventional loans, yes, you can buy investment properties with those. It's going to require 20% down at minimum. FHA, you cannot buy an investment property. Now, you can caveat that by buying like a duplex to a quadplex with an FHA loan, in which case you can still get 3.5% down and rent out, the other couple to three doors to your neighbors. Um, that's cool if you're okay with your tenants living next door to you and knowing where you live and all that sort of stuff. And I've seen people do it. So that is one great way to get you in it. And I've seen people structure up their situation where effectively their guy next door paid their mortgage for them every month. So they got to kind of live in a free house. That would probably be the best starter way to do all this, honestly.
And then there is something called DSCR financing. So can you talk about that a little bit? And can that be used to buy investment property?
Yep. DSCR is made for investment property. And all that DSCR stands for is debt service coverage ratio. That's just a fancy way of saying it doesn't cash flow. So basically, you're doing the loan based on the fact the buyer's got good credit, down payment, but not their income. We're not worried about how much money they're making. We're worried about how much money the house is making. So, effectively, if it's a $2,000 payment and you got good credit and it looks like it's going to rent for $3,000, you could do the loan and you can pretty much just stack those up as long as you got cash to put down on the things.
How about for self-employed investors trying to do bank statement loans or asset-based loans?
You can do those. That being said, with the pricing differences and stuff these days, I just steer somebody back towards the DSCR loan 9 times out of 10 if they're looking to do an investment property. Believe it or not, in the current market, investment property loans that are DSCR loans and things like that are priced just about the same, if not sometimes better than just doing a conventional loan for an investment property.
And then I had another phone call the other day. I get lots of phone calls, as you can tell. I have somebody, I could tell he watched something again on YouTube. He wanted to use a VA loan, and he wanted to buy a cheap place for himself to live. And then he also wanted to use what he said was, and you can correct all this verbiage, entitlement what he got qualified for, to then turn around and also buy one or two investment properties and put trailers on them. So why don't you dig in a little bit on VA loans and what you can and can't do, and if that scenario would ever fly for an investment property?
That as you just said that, no, it would never fly. That would not work. So with a VA loan, it's built to buy your primary residence with. It's there to support veterans. However, there is a caveat with it that allows you to use it to get investment properties. I've got a good friend of mine that's actually done this too, where basically, if you're VA, you're a veteran, or you may currently be in the military. Well, if you just go buy a relatively inexpensive house at each of your duty stations, you can a lot of the times do that with a VA loan with zero down, and then just stack up a real estate portfolio that way. But the key factor is you have to be moving into the house to start with, and you need to live there for a period of time. There's not like a specific, oh, you have to live there for X number of days. But, let's be reasonable and realistic here. I would recommend at least a year before you go stack and go to the next one. But yeah, you can absolutely do VA that way. I've seen people buy up to 4 houses on VA without putting a down payment down. The way that works is you've got what's called bonus entitlement, which you mentioned. And basically, the VA is guaranteeing up to 25% of whatever the loan limit is for any given county. I just said a lot of things that you're probably going to want to Google after that. If so, yeah, just Google it. But we're getting technical here. We're going to go out in the weeds, right? And basically, as long as you've got enough entitlement left over, you can buy another house with zero down. Once you run out of that entitlement, you just have to put down a down payment on it. That's the only thing that changes. But VA loans can be an awesome tool for building a real estate portfolio.
But not in the way that I
Not
ask.
Not by building a trailer park. No.
I was just like, I think there's all kinds of things wrong with your strategy, but okay.
Yes.
So there are a few things that we'll talk about kind of quickly here to kind of start to wrap it up. But there are some things and signs that come along that you should probably avoid, that should probably make you run away or definitely hesitate before you buy an investment property. One of the things I get phone calls on all the time is people wanting, rental projections from the listing agent. Sometimes people have used that property already as an investment property and now they're selling it. So there are times that there are spreadsheets, there are past rents, where we have some information about rentals. But again, one thing is that sometimes people may or may not be telling you the truth, unfortunately, and some of those may be unrealistic. So one of the main things is to do your research, look at rents in that area for that type of property, especially if it's a townhome or a condo or something that is able to be rented out, and just double check and make sure that the rent projections that might be passed on to you seem to be realistic. I mostly see rent projections when it comes to short-term rentals that have been going for quite a while. And that's definitely something that you want me to inquire of the listing agent, if I'm not the listing agent, to make sure. And Matt, kind of what do those rental projections help with on the financing side?
Primarily, they'll help us with if we're doing a debt service the SCR line. Like that's one method that some investors will allow us to use in order to validate that the properties go into cash flow. It just depends on the investor. It's the wild, wild west when it comes to those. They're all going to look at it a little differently. Likewise, it can be used in conjunction with a appraisal or a lease agreement as well to help you qualify for not counting the full mortgage payment potentially. So that if debt to income ratio is a concern, that can help mitigate those issues.
And then the other thing I'm always a little leery of, I personally don't like to use this phrase when I'm listing a property, and that's as is. And particularly when there's no real disclosures that come along with it. If it's an investment property, then sellers only have to fill out a form called a property condition exemption form, which basically tells you nothing about the property. And even though they may know things and they're supposed to disclose it, you just don't see a lot of disclosures particularly when it's not an owner occupied property and they don't have to fill out a longer property condition disclosure. I hate the words as is because it means different things to different people. Most of the time, I find sellers mean they don't want to negotiate or pay for repairs. So that's usually where I start when I start asking questions. But also, it typically is a phrase of there's stuff going on here, so buyer beware. so, so one of the things that leads into is having a rehab budget. Because a lot of people just guesstimate or they think that they can tell. Obviously, I'm a huge believer in having home inspections done. Even with a home inspection, there's going to be some things that you're not going to know, especially if you're going to tear into walls, if you're going to start making major renovations to the layout of the home, then you really don't know what's behind them until you start taking them down. And no home inspector is going to be able to usually tell you that. I mean, there was one story I heard that, there was asbestos in the walls when people started tearing into them. And of course, they didn't know that when they bought the property. And now all of a sudden, opening up your home to an open plan floor concept was not the greatest idea. So you also need to have a rehab budget that is realistic. I mean, some investors, I ask them, are you able to do some of this work yourself? And if so, how good are you at it? And then there's some people like me. When I buy an investment property, I can't do anything. I can barely change a light bulb by myself. So my budget's going to look a lot different than somebody who's going to go in and do most of the work themselves, because I'm going to have to outsource absolutely everything. I have great ideas, but I can't do them. Do rehab budgets play a role when it comes to getting a loan? And are there loan types out there that can help with rehab budgets?
Yeah, so the rehab budget doesn't necessarily impact the loan. Here's the thing, unless we're doing a rehab loan of some sort, we don't want to know it needs rehabbing. Because we're doing a loan on a finished product. We don't need to know that it's ugly. If you are getting a loan that's not a rehab loan, my recommendation is you don't want anything structurally wrong with it. You want it to just be an ugly duckling. Make sure it looks like, Foreman's House for that 70s show. You're golden, as long as it's structurally sound. If you've got something where the house literally is falling apart, then there's products for that, but it's going to be a whole other path that you're going to be traveling down in that situation.
Yeah. And then I mentioned this before, but when you're looking at investment property, you really have to know if there's a homeowner association, and if there is, do they have anything that limits rentals? Because I would say probably 80+% do. I know some builders, and there are some areas where that's not a concern, but you're often going to see a minimum of a 6-month rental, a 12-month rental. I even had some, because I read a ton of HOA documents with the help of ChatGPT not too long ago, for people that were looking at, and they actually did. Matt and I just closed on their rental property in the Pleasant View area, and I had to read every single HOA to figure out what those restrictions might look like. And there were a few that even required you to live in them for 12 months. I think one had 24 months before you could actually turn it into a rental property. So again, you don't want to be surprised by those things and close on a house and realize you just have to now live in it for 2 years. So there's a lot of things out there, if you haven't figured that out yet, between HOAs, between cities, between tiny little cities in counties that tell you can't do short-term rentals for the most part. There's just a lot going out there. It's kind of a little bit, not so much the wild, wild west as much as there's just a lot of check boxes and a lot of research that has to be done to make sure that you can do what you want to do with your rental property, because that may look very different than the TikToker is doing with their rental property in Phoenix, Arizona. Not probably the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I think really just to summarize everything, if your entire investment strategy is based on a bunch of 1-minute TikTok videos, call one of us, call both of us. Let's help you get there. Because they're building that to create views. They're not building that to help you.
Right.
So anyway, hopefully this helps you make some smart moves as it pertains to buying an investment property. And if you've ever got questions, hit either one of us up, and we're happy to help you out as best we can.
Absolutely. We're probably going to be doing some more in depth on investment properties because there's just so many avenues to go down. And just remember, TikTok can't close your deal, but we can. Very important. Okay, so we are Ann Riley Caldwell, not your ordinary agent. I'm here with Matt Wilson, loan officer extraordinaire with New American Funding. And as always, we are here to help you make smart moves, smart and strategic decisions when it comes to real estate financing. And we didn't have a whole lot of life advice, but occasionally we throw that in too. So we can't wait to see you on our next podcast.